Hello and welcome to Typebook. We are Chris and Rose, INTJ and INFJ, and we are cataloging a variety of people based on their Jungian psychological type and their MBTI four-letter abbreviations. We want to make you aware you can now support Typebook through our channel memberships. If this is something you are interested in, stay tuned for more details later on in the video. Today, we are taking a look at Carl Jung. So we are going to start this video a bit differently than we usually do our typing videos. But that's because this is Carl Jung. This is the man who wrote Psychological Types, and he's being asked what his own psychological type is. If we have that interview available and we have the opportunity to hear the man himself declare his type, then I think that that's a good place to start.
Yes, especially since you would think that the man who created his theory, if we're all here, would understand his theory, and therefore understand his own type, even if it was difficult to figure out for himself. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Have you concluded what psychological type you are yourself?
Naturally, I have devoted a great deal of attention to that painful question, you know.
And reached a conclusion?
Well, you see, the type is nothing static. It changes in the course of life. But I most certainly was characterized by thinking. I always thought, from early childhood on. And I had a great deal of intuition too. And I had a definite difficulty with feeling. And my relation to reality was not particularly brilliant. I was often at variance with the reality of things. Now that gives you all the necessary data for the diagnosis.
So that's Carl Jung typing himself according to his own system. So we made this little slide to make it a little bit more understandable. According to psychological types, which is Jung's theory, there are 8 types. 2 are characterized by thinking, 2 are characterized by feeling, 2 by intuition, and 2 are characterized by sensation. Jung said he was characterized by thinking, meaning that was his predominant function. So according to the man, no other types should be entertained because he himself said he was characterized by thinking, meaning that came first. That was the first thing, thinking. So logically speaking, for someone to come along and say, well, Carl Jung was characterized by feeling or intuition or sensation is wrong because the man himself said, no, I am characterized by thinking. So the team of Myers and Briggs took Jung's theory and broke it down so that instead of 8 types, there are now 16 types. So in the Myers and Briggs system, we have 4 thinking dominant types. And we have them listed below for you. INTP, ISTP, ENTJ, ESTJ. Then there are 4 feeling dominant types, 4 intuitive dominant types, and 4 sensing dominant types. So with the language that we have now, using the 4 letters of the MBTI system, if we consider what Carl Jung said, and this is very interesting because he didn't just say he was characterized by thinking and leave it there. He then went on to say he had a great deal of intuition, he had definite difficulty with feeling, and his relation to reality was not very brilliant. He actually laid the groundwork for the MBTI system by typing himself. He really was fleshing it out when he typed himself.
Yes, because he could have stopped at characterized by thinking.
Yes.
And had a great deal of intuition, which basically is, the modern way of how they put it. TINE, for instance, because you can stop there.
So if we look at the MBTI lettering system, Carl Jung says, I'm characterized by thinking. We are on the left side of this table, thinking dominant.
So when he says that he's characterized by thinking, there's only 2 types he can be, TE or a TI. That's what he means, because he distinguishes thinking, feeling, intuition, sensation, and attitude. According to Jung, the attitude is the same thing. just applied to the 4 things at the top there: thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation.
Whether the thing itself, thinking, is extroverted or introverted.
Yes, it's still thinking after all.
Exactly.
Now, he doesn't see the need to say what the attitude is, because it's secondary, obviously. Otherwise he would. He's characterized by thinking. He must be a TI dominant or a TE dominant in MBTI terms.
So to say that he is an INTJ or an INFJ is not logically sound, because he never characterized himself by intuition.
No, he said he had a great deal of intuition. He doesn't elaborate on the attitude. We're all here for the man's ideas, and then we disregard the man, which is absurd.
And if you're going to disregard what the man himself said about his own type, well, then it makes me wonder, why are we even here? Because that doesn't make any sense. We have 4 possibilities in the MBTI system to type Jung. He's a thinking dominant. So we have INTP, ISTP, ENTJ, or ESTJ. Now, the second piece of information he gave us is very crucial. He said he had a great deal of intuition, which means thinking first, intuition second. So we can get rid of ISTP and ESTJ, because he also said that his relation to reality was not particularly brilliant, and he was often at variance with the reality of things. So we can conclude from that he was not a sensing type in the Myers and Briggs language. So we're left with INTP and ENTJ, because he says thinking first, intuition second, difficulty with feeling. And so in this video, we will try to prove to you that Jung is an INTP. Chris, what does consensus say his type is?
INFJ, followed by INTP. But we obviously strongly disagree. We think INTP, and we're going to use this footage to intuitively prompt us to tell you why. 3, 2, 1, go.
Do you remember the occasion when you first felt consciousness of your own individual self?
That was in my 11th year. There I suddenly, on my way to school, I stepped out of a mist. It was just as if I had been in a mist, walking in a mist, and I stepped out of it, and I knew I am. I am what I am. And then I thought, but what have I been before? And then I found that I had been in a mist, not knowing to differentiate myself from things. I was just one thing among many things.
Now, was that associated with any particular episode in your life, or was it just a normal function of adolescence?
Well, that's difficult to say. As far as I can remember, nothing had happened before that would explain this sudden coming to consciousness.
You hadn't, for instance, been quarrelling with your parents or anything?
No.
What memories have
Okay,
you
stop.
of your parents? Were they?
Interesting. So he was 11 or 12 years old before he had that moment where he knew he was a thing. So I think we can obviously get rid of INTJ. I mean, I know that's not the top 2, but people do still say he's INTJ.
Yes, INTJ is third, but it's quite lowly voted for.
Mm-hmm.
When I first heard that he noticed, that he was a conscious being at age 11, I was shocked.
You thought, what took you so long?
Yeah,
Yes.
I find that mad.
Yes. And of course, I don't, because it was probably around a similar time for me. I do remember when I was 12, sort of starting to distance myself in a way from what I had known. But my self-recognition came much later on. And I think for Carl Jung, he knew he was a thing. And I think it took him a while, because in some ways, I think the INTP and the INFJ are at a disadvantage in this self-knowing way, because I think of the NE and the FE kind of slows us down. If you think about it, it's sort of like this function that gobbles things up in a very curious way, right? I mean, we
Right.
say FE people are nosy, NE people can be equally as nosy, right? And I think it's almost like it takes the focus off yourself because you're so busy focusing outwards on everything, whether it's on all that information out there, right? Like the planetarium, all these ideas, or if it's all the people, what all the people are doing. So I think it slows us down from looking at ourselves. Whereas your particular function stack, having higher TE as well as your other functions, kind of give you more of an advantage in this way.
Yes, for me, NI knowing of things gives both of us quite an advantage, but for me, and specifically TE and FI, TE is very quick to draw conclusions, and FI is too, in terms of being and the self.
Right. So I think we can see clearly here that Carl Jung does not possess TE and FI. Now, from my interactions with INTPs in my own life, and also just from observing them from people you and I have typed and studying these people, I know that this isn't unusual. This probably happens to a lot of INTPs. In fact, Sabina Hassenfelder, I think, has recently put out a video talking about her life and how she sort of had this similar experience. So this is where I would say the difference is, even though Carl Jung isn't saying this here, I've heard other INTPs say this, and I'm pretty sure he would have agreed with this. The difference here between INTP and INFP, the INTP would probably say, when they come to that point in their lives at the age of 11, how did I think before if I didn't know I was? Whereas the INFJ is, why am I? And there's a difference here because the INFJ is more personal in it, owing to the higher FE, where the INTP is more impersonal and more clinical about how they see themselves. It's not as personal. That is low FE, that's high NE, high TI. All of these things in the INTP result in them being able to look at themselves in more of a detached way. In other words, it's difficult for them to get too personal even with themselves. Where I think at the INFJ, we have a little bit easier time doing that due to our high FE.
And the motivations.
Exactly.
Because you want to discover who you are specifically. I think Jung would be less occupied with such things.
Well, he does, but the way he approaches it has to be more clinical in a similar way as INTJ, if that makes sense. It gets very personal.
It's more curiosity in an analytical way rather than, I don't know how you could describe an INFJ, but like they are just more feelerish orientated.
Yeah.
That's their motivation.
In some ways, we can be more touchy-feely with ourselves versus the INTP. They have to sort of find avenues to get there. That's not as touchy-feely, if that makes sense. And we're going to see this later on in the interview. As you know, Typebook is the most comprehensive psychological type database on the internet, as well as its premier educational resource. However, we can only go so far without your support, as a project of this magnitude takes significant time to produce. The financial support you give is essential because it allows us to invest more time into the Typebook project in order to continue to provide you with the most accurate and in-depth content on psychological type.
If you are in a position to support our project, there are several ways to get involved. Become a channel member and enjoy perks like custom Typebook badges and members-only voting polls on who you want to see typed next. Alternatively, you can donate to the channel using the Super Thanks button below our video.
You'll want to get involved as we have bold ambitions to not only expand our data set, but to offer you further educational material such as online courses so you can learn how to utilize psychological type to the fullest, as well as the possibility of typing requests, personal typing sessions, and more. As always, we appreciate your support. Okay, we've jumped ahead just a little bit.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
What sort of religious upbringing did your father give you?
Oh, we were Swiss Reformed.
And did he make you attend church regularly?
Oh, well, that was quite natural.
Yes.
Everybody went to church on
Yes.
Sunday.
And did you believe in God?
Oh, yes.
Do you now believe in God?
Now, difficult to answer. I know. I don't need to believe. I know.
Well, now, turning to the next
Okay, stop.
staging point in your life.
Did you see that smirk?
Yeah.
That smirk is so telling. He's
This-
very pleased with his intelligence.
Yes, he's so pleased with his intelligence or his thinking that it makes him FE, which is funny.
Yes, which is a contrast between him and you, because you would be similar in a way, right? Like you would be pleased with yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now he says he doesn't believe in God. He said, I know about God. And that's important to remember because later on he's going to speak about belief versus knowing.
Okay, we skipped ahead a little bit. 3, 2, 1, go.
Decided to become a doctor have difficulty in getting the training at school and in passing the exams?
I particularly had a difficulty with certain teachers that didn't believe that I could write a decent thesis. I remember one case where the teacher had the habit to discuss the papers written by the pupils, and he took the best first, and he went through the whole number of the pupils, and I didn't appear, and I was badly troubled over it, and I thought, well, it is impossible that my thesis can be that bad. And when he had finished, he said, there is still one paper left over, and that is the one by Jung. That would be by far the best paper if it hadn't been copied. He has just copied it somewhere, stolen. You are a thief, Jung. And if I knew where you had have stolen it, I would fling you out of school. And I got mad, and I said, this is the one thesis where I have worked the most, because the theme was interesting, in contradistinction, to other themes which are not at all interesting to me. And then he said, you are a liar, and if you can prove that you have stolen that thing somewhere, then you get out of school. Now that was a very serious thing to me, because what else then, you see? And I hated that fellow, and that was the only man I could have killed, if I had met him once at a dark corner. I would have shown him
All right, stop.
something of what I could do.
Did you?
So he was brilliant. In a sense, he was ahead of the teacher in this way. The teacher could not believe that he could be that smart, that young. He wouldn't accept that. He thought the only answer was that he had plagiarized or copied this paper.
Yeah, it's quite bold to accuse someone of being a thief, isn't it? But, Guy just couldn't believe his eyes, I guess.
And that's because this is INTP in a nutshell. They're almost too brilliant for this world. People don't recognize their intelligence. They don't recognize their thoughts and ideas because probably they haven't seen the likes of it before, right? The teacher probably never saw anything like him before.
Yeah, and it's either absurd and so out of range of consensus that it can't be accepted,
Yes.
or it's so brilliant that, it's copied or you got lucky. And
Yes.
that is the intuitive dilemma, particularly NT.
Exactly. And I've heard this before from INTP as well, doing term papers. You have to cite your references. Where did you get that information from? And this INTP said the teacher didn't believe that he had thought of this on his own. The teacher said, "Where's your citation?" And he said, "Well, I don't have one. It's from my mind." And the teacher said, "No, you have to find the citation for that." Wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to talk about how this is different from INFJ. Okay. I know INFJs want to think of themselves in a certain way as far as, I don't want to say intelligence, but as a thinking person, right? There is no INFJ who is going to be met from a teacher with disbelief over a thesis paper. An INFJ is going to get met with disbelief over something like creative writing, things like that. I know when I was in school, my creative writing was of such a caliber, high caliber, that the teacher could have assumed that I copied it somewhere or I got that idea from somewhere. But the way that the INFJ is misunderstood, it's an intuitive problem, right? He's having an intuitive thinking problem, which is more like NT problem. The NI dominant is going to be dismissed for their intuitions.
Yes,
There's
like
a
you
difference
can't
here.
know that. Because
You can't know that.
I live in a sensor's world, and you would need experience to know this.
Exactly.
There's no explanation for why you are this wise, that you could know this thing.
And that is similar to what happened to Carl Jung, but very slightly different. So I don't think that an INFJ is going to be doubted in something as meaty as a
Theoretical.
thesis paper. Yeah, I think that if I were to write a thesis paper as an INFJ, as you know, presumably, how young was he then? 20s, maybe early 20s.
Early 20s.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think anyone would look at my paper and think, wow, she stole that from somewhere. In fact, I know they wouldn't, because I got good grades in writing and these sorts of things, because I was a good student, right? Like I did everything correct. You know, I followed what I was supposed to do. I didn't come up with some kind of crazy thing that they would think, wow, she plagiarized that. But the INTP would. And that's
Yes.
because
He's
of that
interested.
dominant. That's right.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
As a doctor, what made you decide to specialize in being an alienist?
Yeah, that is rather an interesting point. When I had finished my studies practically, and when I didn't know what I really wanted to do, I had a big chance to follow one of my professors. He was called to a new position in Munich, and he wanted me as his assistant. But then in that moment, I studied for my final examination. I came across the textbook, a textbook of psychiatry. Up to then, I thought nothing about it, because our professor then wasn't particularly interesting. And I only read the introduction to that book, where certain things were said about psychosis as a maladjustment of personality. That hit the nail on the head. In that moment, I saw I must become an alienist. My heart was thumping wildly in that moment. And when I told my professor I wouldn't follow him, I would study psychiatry, he couldn't understand it. No, my friends, because in those days psychiatry was nothing at all. But I saw one great chance to unite certain contrasting things in myself, namely, beside medicine, beside natural science, I always had studied history of philosophy and such subjects. It was just as if suddenly two streams were joining.
And how long was it after you
All right,
took
stop.
that decision that you...
So he said he was always interested in natural sciences. I think in some point of this interview, he mentions how he was interested in zoology. He wanted to be an archaeologist even. So he was interested in natural science, which is the way people are, as well as the history of philosophy, which is the way people
Yes.
think. And then he says these two streams joined together.
Yes.
And then he knew instantly. He read one introduction in a book and knew intuition, right? He knew something was there. This was a new field. This was something new that he knew no one had explored before.
Yes, and
And
he
he
knew he
said,
could
why?
deliver.
And what was his motivation? He said, I saw the one great chance to unite certain contrasting things in myself. So this was a way for him to understand his thinking, which is how he came up with psychological type. He's going to talk about this more and how Freud kind of played into all this.
It's
So you see
interesting
how
all these
analytical this is.
all of these interests are so intuitive in
Yes.
they're ripe for intuition. Natural things and human history, anthropology, archaeology, they're all incredibly interesting to an intuitive mind, I think, because it's not just, oh look, I found something in the ground from 2000 AD or whatever. It's like the implications intuitively for that. What conclusions can you draw from this about people historically and contemporarily? It's all very interesting.
Yes, you use the word conclusion. And I would say that's your INTJ bias.
Right, yeah. Well, it doesn't need to be conclusion necessarily, but it's like, where's it going to take you?
Well, yes, and
That's
you
what I'm
mentioned
saying.
intuition and remembering that you are characterized by intuition, but even though he has intuition, he's characterized by thinking, not only thinking, but introverted thinking. You can see that his motivation for delving into what we now call psychological type was a clinical way of understanding why he thought differently than other people. It started with thinking for him. It didn't start with feeling, not why do I feel different? Why do I sense things different? Why do I intuit? It had nothing to do with that. It was about thinking first.
Do you think in some way it's about completionism? As in, he wants to take all his thoughts and he wants like a full circle, like, yes, there we go. And, in some way with the religious tones in the earlier part of the video, it's like, no, I've gone all the way full circle. I've thought everything out. I know because I have discovered my philosophy and in all these different areas to make my worldview complete. And he's excited by that. And you could see it on his little face when he's all happy, like, oh no, I figured it all out.
Yeah.
He's got the secret sauce to like what he believes. And he loves it.
Okay, we've jumped ahead a little bit and he's speaking about his relationship to Freud.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Well, he was a complicated nature, I liked him very much, but I soon discovered that when he had thought something, then it was settled, while I was doubting all along the line. And it was impossible to discuss something really a fond.
All right, stop there.
So
the biggest problem he was having with Freud was settled in his thoughts when he said, I was doubting all along the line. INTPs doubt all the time for the purpose of testing. Once you stop doubting, you can no longer, as an INTP, play with your ideas. And he was noticing in Freud there was something different between the way Freud went about things as compared to how he went about things. He was doubting. Freud seemed settled. What's the difference between the two of us? He said it was impossible to discuss something with him directly or head on because Freud had closed the door and he had not. So for him, discussions were hard. There was nowhere else to go with the discussion. because Freud was settled. Now, he's noticing this about Freud, and he's wondering, why is he like that? And why am I like this? Why do we think differently?
We skipped ahead a little bit. 3, 2, 1, go.
In fact, grow apart later, partly because of a difference in temperamental approach to experiment and proof and so on.
Well, of course, there is always a temperamental difference. And his approach was naturally different from mine because his personality was different from mine. That led me into my later investigation of psychological types. There are definite attitudes. Some people are doing it in this way and other people are doing it in the other typical way. And there were such differences between myself and Freud too.
Do you consider that Freud's standard of proof and experimentation was less high than your own?
Well, you see, that is an evaluation I'm not competent of. I am not my own history or my historiographer. With reference to certain results, I think my method has its merits.
All right, stop.
Tell me,
It's interesting. Like, he's not willing to say, no, Freud's just doors closed man. Because there's a place for that.
Exactly. He understands that. Now, I would bet in his mind he probably does see himself as superior, but he can't say that because of psychological type. He knows there's a place for Freud. He knew they were different kind of thinkers, right? He said
But
that.
he was probably more suited to this. I'm sure he
Yes.
would agree.
Based on what he has said so far, I feel very comfortable saying that Freud was definitely a TE user, probably a high TE user, could be ISTJ or probably ESTJ, because I think that he was seeing that they were both thinking types, characterized by thinking. Only Freud was characterized by the extroverted thinking, whereas he was characterized by the introverted thinking. And so he saw something different in him.
Well, and the
And now-
intuition too. If they were those types, then they would both have NE, but Freud's prominence would be in the sensation realm, which would be
Right.
one of the big differences here.
So we haven't typed Freud yet, but that's going to be interesting when we get to it. But my working hypothesis right now is STJ. Okay. We've skipped ahead a little bit more.
3, 2, 1, go.
ask you something else then, which perhaps is also indiscreet. Is it true that you have a very large number of letters which you exchanged with Freud, which are still unpublished?
Yes.
When are they going to be published?
Well, not during my lifetime.
You would have no objection to them being published after your life?
Oh, no, not at all.
Because they are probably of great historical importance.
I don't think so.
Then why have you not published them so far?
Because they were not important to me enough. I see no particular importance in them.
They are concerned with personal matters.
Well, partially. But I wouldn't care to publish them.
Well, now,
All right,
can we
stop.
move on to the time?
Were the letters personal? Partially. That's not important to me. They aren't of any great historical importance. That's his primary concern. Are they of great historical importance?
Is there any thinkerism in those letters? No.
They're personal. An INFJ, sorry, I would love to read these letters. For what reason? For the thoughts that they exchange? No, because of what it reveals about the men. I'd love to hear the personal details about them. I'd love to see how they personally related and wrote to one another. He didn't see any value in that. That's low FE right there.
That's not
There's
INFJ.
no value in this. Now, of course not. It's not INFJ. I would just die to get my hands on those letters. Not from the same reason. Is it historically important? Does that matter to me? Not necessarily. Yes, but that's way down the line. It's more important because they're personal. They're not personal to him, are they?
There's information to be mined depending on what functions you possess.
Exactly.
And for an INFJ, the FE, they've got the right pickaxe to mine that stuff out.
That's
and
right.
Jung certainly does not, and he's doing something differently.
That's right.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Time when you did eventually part company with Freud. It was partly, I think, with the publication of your book, The Psychology of the Unconscious. Is that correct?
That was the real cause.
Well, now, before you...
Oh, I mean the final course, because it had a long preparation. From the beginning I had a reservatio mentalis. I couldn't agree with quite a number of his ideas.
Which ones in particular?
Well, chiefly his purely personal approach and his disregard of the historical conditions of man. You see, we depend largely upon our history. We are shaped through education, through the influence of the parents, which are by no means always personal. They were prejudiced, or they were influenced by historical ideas, or what I call dominance. And that is a most decisive factor in psychology. And we are not of today or of yesterday. We are of an immense age.
Was it not partly your observation,
He said his problem with Freud was his purely personal approach and disregard of the historical conditions of man.
Yeah.
Jung said, we depend largely on our history. We're shaped through education, through the influence of the parents, which is by no means personal.
Okay.
He is
circumstantial.
Yes. He is suggesting that we are shaped through something bigger than our parents. I would say that even though this is not quite correct, he perceives it as more objective, where Freud saw it more subjective, and that's where they were clashing. He's looking out in a sense, where Freud's more looking in another sense, and that's where they were clashing.
It sounds like FI in some ways.
Yes, because they share NE and SI. If Freud is an STJ, they share that. But where are they clashing? They're clashing in the thinking and the feeling. Jung is saying it's not personal.
Freud is saying
he's not a feeler.
No.
He's not
I know
an FI.
what I know.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm extrapolating it because I'm sure of the beliefs and conclusions I've made in the feeling realm.
Exactly.
Whether that's a third slot ISTJFI or not.
Carl Jung is objective when it comes to feelings because it's too personal. He has to be clinical about it. He has to be thoughtful about feelings.
And this is exactly the same method, albeit a little bit different, for INTJ too. There's a,
right.
But I think for us, there's more of a conscious clip that feelings part off and off we go, rather than ignore it completely or something. I don't know. Maybe it's different for an INTP than it is for us.
Well, it's kind of what I said earlier. You don't mind kind of getting up close and personal with your feelings. That's distrusted.
Right.
That to an INTP, that's not to be. It's not that it's disregarded. It's not enough. There has to be a reason for that.
Maybe that's a better way to put it. They're not interested. It's not relevant. They don't see the value in it in that way. Whereas I think for us, like there are places for FI to have value in the way that we think, even though a lot of time we like to chuck it in a corner and pretend it doesn't exist to be analytical, just in the same way as Jung would be 3, 2, 1, go.
How did you first decide to start your work on the psychological types? Was that also as a result of some particular clinical experience?
Less so, it was a very personal reason, namely to do justice to the psychology of Freud, also to that of Adler, and to find my own bearings. That helped me to understand why Freud developed such a theory, or why Adler developed his theory, his power principle.
What got you to develop this? Was it your clinical observations? He said less so. What did he say? It was a very personal reason. Now we hear that, we think, oh, personal. It's personal. He said it was to do justice to the psychology of Freud and this other man and to find his own bearings. It's not necessarily to do justice to Freud's method, but how he thought of his method. You see the difference?
He wants to lay out what he thinks about how other people think.
And in doing so, learn more about his own thinking. INTPs study other thinking types so that they can learn more about their thinking and unearth more ways to develop their thinking. That's what he was doing here.
It's all about the thinking.
It's all about the thinking. He is obsessed with his thinking, not his intuition. He is obsessed with his thinking. He wants to he started this whole thing, psychological types, as a way to understand other people's thinking and to make his thinking even better.
All the while thinking.
All the while thinking. Exactly. Okay, so we've already played this earlier for you at the beginning when we said that he knows how to type himself and our arguments for that. But I just want to play it again because I want to point out something different since we're typing him officially now.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Self.
Naturally, I have devoted a great deal of attention to that painful question, you know.
And reached a conclusion.
Well, you see, the type is nothing static. It changes in the course of life. But I most certainly was characterized by thinking. I always thought, from early childhood on. And I had a great deal of intuition too. And I had a definite difficulty with feeling. And my relation to reality was not particularly brilliant. I was often at variance with the reality of things. Now that gives you all the necessary data for the diagnosis.
He is showing his cleverness right here. This is INTP in a nutshell. He's been asked a question. Have you determined your own psychological type? I mean, he could have been clear as day, which I certainly would be as an INFJ. I would lay it out. This is my psychological type. He doesn't see the need to do that. He sees more of a need to show his cleverness. I'm going to tell you this. That's enough for you to make a diagnosis. Because what a dumb question you just asked me. That interviewer asked him the stupidest question ever. Have you determined your own psychological type? And Carl Jung is probably thinking, well, of course so. That's ridiculous. So let me show you my cleverness in answering such a stupid question. And people don't know this about INTP, but it's similar to you INTJs. They like to play in this way with other people to show their cleverness. And that's what he's doing right here. He's showing his cleverness.
Well, and as motivation for people to actually put the effort in, you know?
Yes.
Like, he's basically just given them a flat pack furniture thing, and he's gone, well, I'm not putting it together for you. Come on.
Yeah.
Off you go. You've got everything you need. There's 4 legs and a top to that table.
Exactly. Because I think to the INTP, we say, there are no stupid questions. I think to an INTP, there are stupid questions. And this was one of them.
Yeah,
Known for
it is,
psychological type. It is.
The way
It's a dumb question.
phrase the question.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if he was like, I've never even considered that. Good point there.
Yeah.
What? Come on, mate. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
Self believe that death is probably the end, or do you believe that?
Well, I can't say. You see, the word belief is a difficult thing for me. I don't believe. I must have a reason for a certain hypothesis. Either I know a thing, and when I know it, I don't need to believe it. If I don't allow myself, for instance, to believe a thing just for the sake of believing it. I can't believe it. But when there are sufficient reasons for a certain hypothesis, I shall accept these reasons, naturally, and shall say, we have to reckon with the possibility of so-and-so,
Well, now, you've told us that we should regard death as being a goal.
Okay,
Yes.
stop
And
there.
to shrink away from.
So for him, there's a difference between believing versus knowing. It's funny because we didn't play this in the interview, but they asked him about his mother, and he said he had a hard time with his mother. He got along better with his father because his father was predictable, and his mother was not. She was more problematic, he said. And I also probably believe that his mother was a strong feeling type, possibly FI. She didn't make sense to him. Probably because, again, here we go back to FI, right? There's a clash in a way between the FI and the TI. For him, I think he would associate it. It's not enough to believe. You have to know something. In other words, you have to follow a certain progression in proving something to get to the point of knowledge. And because he can't see it in someone else, how someone with FI could probably arrive at that same place, it was suspect to him. Okay, so I thought it would be an important way to end this typing to have him explain about the end of life.
3, 2, 1, go.
We should regard death as being a goal.
Yes.
And that to shrink away from it is to evade life and
Yes.
live life purposes.
Yes.
What advice would you give to people in their later life to enable them to do this when most of them must in fact believe that death is the end of everything?
Well, you see, I have treated many old people, and it's quite interesting to watch what the unconscious is doing with the fact that it is apparently threatened with a complete end. It disregards it. Life behaves as if it were going on. And so I think it is better for old people to live on, to look forward to the next day, as if he had to spend centuries. And then he lives properly. But when he is afraid, when he doesn't look forward, he looks back, he petrifies, he gets stiff and he dies before his time. But when he is living on, looking forward to the great adventure that is ahead, then he lives. And that is about what the unconscious is intending to do. Of course, it's quite obvious that we are all going to die, and this is the sad finale of everything. But nevertheless, there is something in us that doesn't believe it, apparently. But this is merely a fact, a psychological fact. Doesn't mean to me that it proves something. It is simply so. For instance, I may not know why we need salt, but we prefer to eat salt too, because you feel better. And so when you think in a certain way, you may feel considerably better. And I think if you think along the lines of nature, then you think properly.
And this leads me to the last question that I want to ask you. As the world becomes more technically efficient, it seems increasingly necessary for people to behave communally and collectively. Now, do you think it possible that the highest development of man may be to submerge his own individuality in a kind of collective consciousness?
That's hardly possible. I think there will be a reaction. A reaction will set in against this communal dissociation. You know, man doesn't stand forever his nullification. Once there will be a reaction, and I see it setting in. You know, when I think of my patients, they all seek their own existence, and to assure their existence against that complete atomization into nothingness or into meaninglessness. Man cannot stand a meaningless life.
Here is the idealism and the optimism of the INTP. Carl Jung, this rational thinking man, has just told us that in order to live a full life, we must live in a delusion. Even though we all know we will die, we can't acknowledge that. We have to live as if that's not the possibility.
Yes. And I agree completely.
Of course, because you are also a pragmatic idealist.
Yes. Yes.
Because you both see the reality of things, and yet you also see the idealism as well. INTPs are very optimistic, as intelligent as they can be, as thinkerish as they are. There is this childlike optimism. Even though this is the nature, this is the reality of things, you have to disregard that to a certain degree in order to live a full life. In a similar way as an ESFJ. They kind of come around to that at the end, don't they?
Yes, I would imagine that mellow and become more feelerish as they age.
Maybe you don't have to rationalize it. That's what he's saying in a sense. He knows realistically you're going to die, but he's saying you have to live in a delusion, not think about it. Continue on with your life.
Yeah, I mean, analyticalness is amazing. It's a lot of fun.
Yes.
You can draw so many conclusions from it. But, you know, I realised as my type that, you know, you sort of have to leave that at the door when it comes to enjoying your life outside of the analyticalness itself. For INTP and INTJ, with our analytical natures, yes, I think this is, you know, this is our nature.
Thank you for watching this video. Please give us a like, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment or typing suggestion, and share this video. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel memberships, which can be accessed with the join button below the title of this video. Your support is greatly appreciated, and we'll see you on the next video.